As we get close to Rally Day, our fall kickoff, I feel like every single year we have these super awkward gospel readings where Jesus is assuming that we're not going to do things perfectly and how to deal with one another, and it's kind of messy business, and to have that be front and center when we're hoping to welcome all kinds of people in and have their first experience with grace always feels a little funny. I suppose a bonus this year is that there's just like 6 of us here, so and a bunch of you out there, of course. But today's text touches on a number of things, and I want to go back to a story from early in my ministry. When I graduated from seminary and had been assigned to the Northwest Minnesota Synod, Marielle and I had been married for about 4 years, and we were expecting our first child. In fact, when we moved up to Minnesota, Marielle was about 7.5, 8 months along, and we were starting in a new parish in Northwest Minnesota where we had never lived. Things were exciting, and one of the articles that Marielle had been reading was one entitled Finding Dr. Right. So this is an article about how to find the right pediatrician for your newborn, right? This was some of the reading as new parents are prone to do. And so we were reading along, and then in all of the excitement of our son's birth, and as most all of you know, significant cardiac issues, we show up in Minneapolis. Eli has been flown to Children's Hospital there, and we meet his cardiologist that Eli apparently found all on his own. And he introduced himself, and he said, "Hi, I'm Dr. Greg Wright." And we thought, of course you are. Of course you are, Dr. Wright. One of the times when Eli had surgery, I remember standing in the ICU following, and it had been about a day after surgery. We were starting to breathe a little easier. We walked in and we saw Dr. Wright standing at the bedside, which was not terribly unusual during rounds, but there were 2 other cardiologists also hovering over the bed. And they were talking for quite a while, and we were standing off a bit, not wanting to interrupt, but feeling increasingly anxious as this powwow was carrying on. And eventually, the other 2 cardiologists left, and we approached Dr. Wright to say, "What's going on? Is everything okay?" And he looked at us kind of surprised and said, "Yeah, everything's fine." He said, "You know, when we're all standing here, it's good to remember that just like an airplane that's on autopilot, the pilots don't all just leave the cockpit. It's always good to be watching." I was reminded of this story as we think of the text that we have today, because when we talk about our relationships with one another, certainly the text is focusing on relationships within the life of the church, within the life of the parish, but this is true for any relationship. In fact, in premarital counseling, we will often use this kind of language to say that relationships require active maintenance on a regular basis, even when things are going perfectly smoothly. Even then, they require maintenance. Good relationships individually, within a faith community, and even broader, require active management and tending. The idea that we deal with one another directly, person to person, and not in third parties. Now, that's hard for human beings because we get hurt sometimes. And we tend to deal with that hurt in different ways. And not all the time are those ways necessarily healthy. They're not always the ways in which we would want to deal with one another. There's a movie that came out several years ago. It was an animated film, or is an animated film, by Pixar called Wreck-It Ralph. Now, some of you are maybe familiar with this movie, but the movie is about a video game and the characters in that video game and how they deal with one another. Wreck-It Ralph's job in his video game is to wreck stuff, and Fix-It Felix is the one who fixes it, right? Well, in the second installment of this movie, it is Ralph Breaks the Internet. It was a great update. And Ralph finds himself in the internet, which is this vast, endless city and metropolis of things, and he is in need of finding a way to fix something for a friend. and this requires money. And how he gets this money is by embarrassing himself through YouTube videos. Now, I know you can't imagine this scenario, but nonetheless, there he is with one embarrassing film after the next, after the next, after the next. But the part of the story that is particularly touching is the moment that he begins to notice the comments that are happening on the YouTube videos. The comments, right? The comments. We all know when we read a news story, when we go to social media, what are you not supposed to do? Read the comments, right? They're horrible. And they're particularly horrible when they are what? Anonymous. Anonymous, right? The worst of who we are as human beings comes out in anonymous comments. This is the hazard and the brokenness of humanity as expressed in relationships, and it's worse when we feel like there is more distance. One of the other things that comes to mind when I think of this gospel text in particular is the time that I worked at Mount Cross Camp here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Again, most of you know I spent 4 summers at Mount Cross working as leadership staff and as a counselor. And one of the things about working at a camp is you have this profound sense of community. You are eating together, sleeping together, working together in the same jobs. There is a tightness in community that you likely won't experience anywhere else in your whole life. In fact, so much can happen in such a short period of time that the expression we had on staff is that time at camp is dense. You will find people start dating at the beginning of the summer and they're engaged at the end of the summer. Things happen at like warp speed because of this tight community. But on the flip side, drama can come up swiftly. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to deal with that. And in outdoor ministry, it is well known that drama has to be dealt with quickly and face to face. Because anonymous snittering around the edges is something that is just awful and corrosive to the community. Face-to-face, direct communication is what Christ is calling us to, and not because it's easy. I think that's where we get lost sometimes, is that the idea that the easiest path is somehow the best or the healthiest. And that is almost never the case. If we've been hurt, we often want to step aside, talk to other parties that are not even related to the issue at hand, and instead Christ says, no, be bold. Do not be anonymous. Speak directly to one another. Build community in a way that shows your authentic self and deals with other people in a direct and heartfelt fashion, assuming the best in one another. That's not always the easiest thing to do. But one of the things that I find interesting in this text is that when Jesus challenges us in how to deal with one another when we are not at our best, doesn't seem like the best story, does it? It's like Jesus is turning to us and saying, I know you all are going to mess this up. And when you do, here's what you should do. So we have that piece. But this reading ends with probably one of the most powerful aspects of grace and gospel of any reading that we will have during this year. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, when you are doing the hard, awkward work of maintaining healthy relationships and community, when you're in the midst of that, that is exactly where you will find me. You will find me when you are doing that work in my name. And so while Jesus may have assumptions about when we fall short, there is a profound promise to be in our midst when we are doing that work. So as we move into this new year, let us continue to do that work. Let us keep bringing Christ in our midst, that communities might be whole and healthy, and that we might be our best Christ-centered selves for the sake of the world. Amen.